Well, hello. So glad we get to continue our study into the miracles of Jesus. We got a chance yesterday to look at the healing on the Sabbath of the man with the withered hand, which really is kind of culminating a section in both Mark and Luke of Jesus kind of expanding his ministry and clarifying what his ministry about and how that is coming into opposition with the teachings of the Pharisees. Luke then spends the next couple of verses, really the rest of chapter 6, in kind of an abbreviated form of the Sermon on the Mount. It's got a lot of similarities to Matthew chapter 5 through 7. Talks a lot about the similar things, addressing the disciples and talking about the cost of following Jesus, what that's going to look like, what the rewards and what the obligations are going to be of that as well. In Luke chapter 7, we then have a return to Jesus' ministry, and there's a really cool miracle that takes place here. It's in Luke chapter 7, and then it's also paralleled in Luke chapter 8, Matthew chapter 8. And so these two accounts, Mark does not include this miracle in his gospel account, but Matthew and Luke, really actually this is a good example of the two gospels using the same story, but emphasizing very different aspects of these. And so we're going to take a look at these two, both of them drawing out really important points for us to understand, but showing us a really interesting dynamic of Jesus' ministry that may be very obvious to us today, 2,000 years later, but would have come as a very big surprise to everybody who followed Jesus up until this point. So let's dive in Luke chapter 7 and verse 1. It says, when he had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum. And so Capernaum has been the town we've really been focused on for the past several chapters of all three of the gospel accounts. It's where all of Jesus' miracles have been taking place up until this point, with a few exceptions. It's really serving as kind of the base of operations for Jesus at this point. It says, and a centurion's slave who was highly regarded by him was sick and about to die. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders, asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, he is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue. Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes, to another, come, and then he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such good faith, such great faith. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. This is a pretty fascinating story of Jesus because it is so unexpected. Remember the context of what's going on here. Judea, Israel, all these different areas, they are all under the control of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire is not the good guys in this situation. The Roman Empire is viewed by Jews as oppressors. They are viewed as corrupt. They are viewed as wicked. They are viewed as an evil nation that is oppressing the Jews. And so much so that many Jews had come to believe that the Messiah was coming to save them from Rome, was coming to save them from these enemies, just as they had been saved from Assyria and Babylon and all these other nations. And so for this centurion, a Roman military officer who'd be in charge of approximately 100 people, for him to be in this story is surprising on its face. But it's also surprising that he responds to Jesus, that he knows about Jesus, that he cares enough even to be aware of him, but also that he thinks that Jesus can heal his servant. Matthew and Luke approach this a little bit differently. Luke notes for us that the Jewish elders come on behalf of the centurion, and they kind of explain why this odd situation is taking place. It's actually that this Roman centurion seems to have some sort of good relationship with the Jewish people. He has built them a synagogue, which is a very expensive task, which shows that this is pretty well-off centurion, or at least a very powerful centurion, to order his men to build these things. And he has good relationships with the Jewish people. And so the Jewish elders argue on behalf of this man's good treatment of the Jewish nation, we believe you should go. Matthew portrays it a little bit differently. Matthew actually doesn't mention the envoys at all. Matthew makes it seem as if the centurion himself is coming to Jesus. And there's reasons for this. Matthew is emphasizing the nationality conflict here. Matthew is really emphasizing that this Gentile person is coming to a Jewish Messiah. That's a very odd thing. It's very unexpected. And so he kind of cuts out the middleman so that we get that narrative tension there. But that doesn't mean that he's contradicting Luke, because these envoys that are being sent, both these initial Jewish envoys and those who come as friends of the Roman centurion, they're clearly speaking with his words. And so the words that Matthew attributes to the centurion are the centurion words. Luke is just kind of giving us more details that these are actually being conveyed to us through these envoys. Still the centurion speaking, but speaking through somebody else. Luke is emphasizing the humility of this centurion. He's emphasizing the fact that this centurion is kind of recognizing who Jesus is. Now, there is an interesting note to be made here, because Jesus in Matthew's account, he actually kind of asks a question here. If you look at Matthew chapter 8, when you're reading this, Jesus says in verse 7 that when the centurion comes and says, "Lord, my servant's lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented," Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." In some translations, that sounds like kind of a definitive statement. I'll come and heal him. The original text, though, actually more indicates a question. And it's a question with the emphasis on, shall I come and heal him? And it's drawing attention to who Jesus is. Jesus is almost saying, like, I'm a Jewish faith healer. I'm a Jewish Messiah. I'm not a Roman. I'm not a centurion. I'm not one of your people. Why are you coming to me? And I don't think this is Jesus asking indignantly. I don't think this is Jesus saying, like, oh, how dare you come to me? But it's asking the question. It's kind of probing, like, why are you doing this? Why is it that you think that I can do this for you? And so in that light, we then see the response that apparently Jesus does decide to go with the envoys. He's curious about this, and he walks with them. The centurion sends a second group of people and tells them, hey, you don't need to come. I'm not worthy for you to come into my house. And that's an interesting phraseology there, because this could be that he is aware of the Jewish-Gentile divide, and that the Jews could be unclean for even coming into a Gentile house. And so it could be that the centurion is like, hey, I know that's awkward for you. I know that would make you unclean. You don't have to worry about that. Or, as his response seems to indicate, he understands that's not necessary. The Roman centurion says, do not trouble yourself. I'm not worthy for you to come under this roof. That's the reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. I didn't even want to pollute you with my presence. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority, notice that phraseology, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, he goes, to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it. The centurion makes it clear, he's like, you don't need to come to my house. I know you have authority, because I'm somebody who's under authority. And so the centurion, by using that phraseology, he's saying both I have authority over people, and also I derive my authority from somebody higher up. I understand what it means to have authority delegated to me. I understand what it means to exert authority. And so I understand if I say a word, that word is done. So I know that if you say a word, you who are also a figure of authority, if you say it, it'll be done. It's an enormous statement of faith to say that I don't think you're magic or something, I just think you're in authority. And that's been the point that Luke has been drawing out this whole time. We got to talk yesterday about how Jesus is asserting his authority to forgive sins. He's asserting his authority to decide who is his disciples. He's asserting his authority over the Sabbath as the Son of Man. And here comes this Roman centurion who's like, I know you're under authority. I know you are a man of authority. So you just say the word and I have faith my servant will be healed. And it says that Jesus marveled. Think about the implication of that statement. That Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Son of Man, David's heir, God with us, Yahweh made flesh, marvels at this guy. He's surprised by this. Can you imagine surprising God? And he says, I haven't seen this type of faith anywhere in Israel. And yet this Roman centurion gets it. He understands who I am. Now, I don't think this is claiming that this Roman centurion fully understands the complications of the Trinity and the incarnation and everything like that. That's not the point being made. But he gets that this Son of Man has authority. And he's not just some guy with some powers. This is somebody who is different. And Jesus says, I haven't seen this anywhere in Israel. Matthew actually expands upon that point, and he actually kind of draws out a lesson for those of Israel. Matthew says in verse 10, he says, truly I say to you, I've not found such great faith with anyone in Israel. I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew expands, and so he uses this story to make the point. I haven't come just for Israel. And in fact, I'm going to be rejected by a lot of Israel. There's going to be a lot of Israelites. There's going to be a lot of Jews that do not enter the kingdom of heaven. They'll be shut out because they don't have the type of faith that this Gentile does. And that would be a really, really shocking statement. Even though, as we've been talking in other sections of our studies, even though we know the prophets talk about all the nations coming together, all the nations coming up to Jerusalem to worship, everybody interpreted that as everyone will become Jews. That the only way to salvation is to either be born a Jew or to become a Jewish proselyte, to worship God through the Jewish system. And Jesus is saying, no, you don't understand. Some of you won't make it because you don't have the faith that this guy does. And there's going to be Gentiles that will come from all over the world, and they'll be in the kingdom while Jews are not. That's a radical statement, and it's a big deal. But what's interesting about it is that while Luke doesn't mention that specific point, this is actually a fulfillment of what Luke has earlier recorded in Luke chapter 2, when Jesus in his infancy is presented at the temple. There is a prophet Simeon who sees Jesus, and he's been promised that's his, before he dies, he'll get to see the Messiah. He takes the child in his arm, bless God, and says, now, Lord, you are releasing your bondservant to depart in peace, according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all people, a light of revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people, Israel. Jesus was coming for a broader ministry than just salvation to the Jews. He was coming for the sake of everyone. And those who would have faith, like this centurion, it wouldn't matter whether they were Jew or Gentile. It didn't matter what ethnicity they were. They could be saved by God, and they could be a part of this kingdom. And then the final thing that I think is really cool here is that this centurion says, I understand who you are. I know you have authority. And if you but say the word, it'll be done. Now, Matthew has it says, go, and he talks to the centurion, which we know is one of his envoys. He says, go, what you've asked for is done. And Matthew tells us that he was healed that very hour. Notice in Luke, it says, now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him, turned and said to the crowd that was following him, I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith. When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. Jesus doesn't say a word. Matthew has him say, hey, go back home. Luke, he doesn't even say a word. Jesus is so powerful that he doesn't even have to say a word. And so while this centurion has been given an understanding and understands what it means to be authority, that he has authority in his words, Jesus is even greater still, because Jesus doesn't have to say a healing word. His will is enough to make this servant whole, to unparalyze this centurion's servant. And so Luke is showing us, and Matthew is as well. I don't think what Matthew is saying is a healing word. Matthew literally just says, this is amazing faith. Go. What you've asked for has been done. Jesus has shown that he's even greater than this centurion. The greatest faith in Israel so far has been able to conceive, and Jesus is greater still than that. And so what Jesus is doing in this gospel case is he's building up not just his mission, but he's also showing more and more the magnitude of his authority, the magnitude of his power, that not only is his word authoritative, but as the Son of Man, his will is authoritative. And so these building blocks are going to continue to build and build and build as we keep building that case that ultimately we're going to see ends in the cross and the empty tomb. Thank you so much for listening to these things. I hope that gives you some things to think about. I hope that gives you some encouragement in our own prayers, that we would have faith that Jesus is able to work not just the words that he says, but he is able to work his will. He is not fettered by distance or presence, although Jesus is not far from any of us, but he can work his will however he so chooses. And that should be of enormous comfort to those of us who have faith that he is the authority, that he is the king that he claims to be. I encourage you guys to think on these things. I hope it's been edifying for you, and I hope it's been something you can continue to think about and pray about. We miss you guys so much. We love you. We hope we can get to continue these things, continue this study. We hope to get to continue it in person as soon as we can. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.